What we found in discussing was that there were core problems with our HBCUs. The UNCF has done a report that conducted a survey which highlighted many of the features having to do with sustainability at our HBCUs. And unfortunately, our HBCUs are not leading in this area. And what we found is that the problem is, many of the buildings are even getting old. There's higher costs of energy uses. There are missed opportunities in terms of recycling. There are also opportunities where the culture of sustainability is just not brought on campus. Now, we also know the real problems that exist. Endowments are down. The financial situation is precarious for many universities. But there are missed opportunities. What we found is that there are three main goals that we would hope for HBCUs to get involved with. One, we found a model at Howard University, one of my alma maters, where they are partnering with another energy company to bring a smart grid on campus. Now, the goals of this smart grid program are not only to serve the energy needs of the campus, but it's also an opportunity for their students to engage in the technology and research capabilities that go into developing a smart grid. But in addition to that, the goal of the university is to also serve the Shaw neighborhood in Washington, D.C. So again, they are developing their own smart grid for use on their campus. They are employing their students to develop this smart grid, and then they're going to use it to power their campus, which we think is just a remarkable idea. Now, we also hope that one of our goals is to make such an amazing project like this more visible to other HBCUs around the country. And in doing that, we hope that that will help spur the leadership. Howard University will be, again, an example of a school that's doing this, and other schools will be interested in partnering to do such things for their students. Thirdly, we are hoping to get more jobs for students. Now, we had a panel that will follow this one that talked about green jobs, and there are a number of problems when you think about quote-unquote shovel-ready green jobs for people who are misplaced from work. But when we're talking about HBCUs, when we're talking about trained students that are in school studying certain topics, it's a great opportunity for them to also take additional classes related to either LEED certification or other topics that would allow them to go right into the green industry after graduation, whether it's solar or wind or whatever it may be. But the opportunities, maybe our schools should think about more curriculum, more academic plans that would involve sustainability jobs. And the last thing, I know those were three, but I just have one more, because this was a dual panel. The last thing is that our universities really need to serve as a resource for our communities, a resource for research and also for implementation of models in low-income communities. And so those are our goals for HBCUs, and we hope that we can work to make them come to fruition.
Thank
you.
Why don't we do, John, do the other session at your table and say what it was, please?
So the formal title of this one was Communities of Color, Leadership in the Green Economy, Green Entrepreneurship, and Green Jobs. So I think everybody knows I'm a fellow Green for All. I was sitting here on behalf of Green for All to help facilitate this panel. We took a real winding road, I think, to get to our three topics. But the first is that we need to address finance issues for minority-owned businesses. A lot of businesses who are trying to enter into this green economy have issues sort of mining or getting through the mines in terms of how do you get access to finance, what are the financing models, what trainings are necessary. In New Orleans, for instance, with our Solar Cities program, we had to subsidize a lot of the trainings for the minority contractors who want to become solar certified. So NABCEP is the requirement that's there for a solar installer. It's about $1,500 to $2,000 training. Most folks couldn't afford it. We had to provide the subsidy for that. And as everyone's mentioned, these subsidies will dry up. So how do we continue to get these minority businesses into these green job training programs, which are very expensive and come with a huge overhead to them. Our second was that we need to build coalitions to create city-scale clean energy programs. Again, just referencing some of my own work in New Orleans, we've taken some of our energy block grant dollars from the Department of Energy. We've established a loan loss reserve, and we're buying down interest rates for a citywide energy loan program. Also working with the utility for energy rebate, and the loan will offset the additional cost from a rebate. So how do we get some programs like that available nationally? We actually had someone here who used to work for the Low-Income Weatherization Assistance Program in DC for like the last 20 years. And he's pretty jaded from some of the experiences that he's had over the past 20 years trying to finance low-income weatherization. It's not an easy thing to do. It's very difficult. When you're going into low-income property, it's many times dilapidating. It's barely even up to code. And now you're telling them that you're going to cut their energy bills by 30% by sticking in insulation and replacing their HVAC systems. It's a difficult thing to pull off. But there are a number of jobs available in that. And Green for All has research available on their website, greenforall.org, that has some of the national data and statistics on success stories of how these things have been pulled off. It's not easy. It takes a lot of work. The third thing was that we need to work with finance institutions, utilities, and municipalities to create sustainable models for long-term financing. So this goes in the way of renewable portfolio standards, decoupling your utility. That's where you basically separate your utilities incentive structure from creating more nuclear power plants or creating more coal plants. They get paid more many times. Their billing structure is set up so that they get paid more for the more energy they produce. There's a policy that can be enacted called decoupling, where you separate that structure to where they get paid first for doing and implementing energy efficiency or renewable energy measures, as opposed to creating these new nuclear power plants and these new coal plants. That's something that needs to happen on a policy level, and you're not going to be able to pull that off unless you have a coalition of the willing on the ground. So getting ourselves educated on these different policy structures that need to be put in place. Getting on the ground, local action groups organized, and getting them to go to their local representation, city council members, mayor, and what have you. Getting this type of policy enacted definitely needs to happen. And then just working with lending institutions. Many people know that local banks are no longer lending, so to get a small business loan is not as easy as it once was. One of the reasons that we did this loan loss reserve program was to make banks more confident in lending, because obviously they weren't going to do it without having a reserve in case that they had defaults. So incentivizing your local lending institutions to get out there and start lending money is a huge thing. Also, tax credits in the state of Louisiana. As Chelsea knows, we're still claiming the best tax credit in the nation. It's a 50% tax credit for up to $25,000 in cost. That took a lot of work to get done. This is for renewables, all renewables, solar, wind, biomass, and hydro, 50% tax credit. And one of the only reasons we got it done is because senators were literally laughing at us because they didn't think it was going to have any economic impact. They did this economic development study and they were like, oh yeah, give them their little tax credit. Well, we're now contending with oil and gas companies, and we've got a solar company that's doing $1 million in business. We've got a wind blade manufacturing facility that's moved to the city of New Orleans. We've got a hydro company that's just dropped the first river turbine in the region, in the Mississippi River. They didn't think any of that was going to happen, but surprise, So it takes a lot of just, being very active on a policy level, on a finance level. I mean, this is an all-in industry. You have to be a jack of all trades. And I think we tried to address some of those issues in this panel here today.
Okay. And say the name of your session.
The name of our session was Gender Justice in the Energy Justice Movement. And so this conversation took us everywhere from economics to population control to issues around women in disaster. So we covered quite a bit in 30 minutes, and I'll give you just some bits and pieces of what we talked about. So one of the first things that came up was that in a lot of our communities around environmental justice work, it's really the women who are doing the bulk of the work, who are doing that grunt work, but a lot of those women are doing this work unpaid because they aren't working for nonprofits. If they are, they're working for very small, underfunded nonprofits. So they, leave this organizing work, go on to jobs that actually do pay them, which then creates a very serious financial and family burden for them. The other thing that came up was having this conversation about the clean energy economy. If we already see that there's a lack of representation of women in jobs that we would consider to be manual labor, jobs that we do see are being tracked to be considered green jobs, how do we then ensure that there's a fair representation of women and that women can stake a claim in the new green energy economy? We talked about the fact that women's reproductive health and rights are compromised by the causes and effects of climate change. So on both ends, when the emissions of mercury and other coal pollutants that are coming out of the stacks of the coal-fired power plants and other facilities in our communities are disrupting and inhibiting our ability to be able to make decisions about when, where, why, and how we reproduce, and how to actually have healthy families inside of communities that are inundated with so much poison and pollution. And also, what's happening to women who are raising children, taking care of families when disasters are striking. How are women able to move and even to relocate if they have to do it for themselves and for their children? So what we came up with, that there needs to be a broader and more strategic dissemination of information that's coming from the conversations around the intersections between reproductive justice, environmental justice, and climate justice. And in June, there's a meeting that's going to happen. It's actually a pretty small meeting of women from around the country, women of color from around the country, who are coming together to talk about these intersections. And so I made it my business to make sure that I get that information and everything that comes from that meeting out to folks here. And actually a couple of people here who will be there. Jackie will be there. Lily will also be there. And someone from Sierra Club that Leslie has so graciously sent to us is also going to be there. We also said that there needs to be more of a development of trainings, tools, and research around this intersection, because we talk a lot about people of color, indigenous people, and low-income people as vulnerable communities, but what we don't talk about is the vulnerability of women inside of those groups as vulnerable communities. And we have to really begin to look at these things from a gendered lens, because we have to be able to have, if we're talking about vulnerable populations, we also have to talk about the vulnerability inside of vulnerable populations. Thank you.
Excellent.
Excellent.
Thank you.